What's up, marketers? Today we're going to look at real examples of winning meta ad creative across a variety of industries. We even have a little bit of the data for each of these great examples. So let's dive in and analyze the tactics and strategies these brands and agencies are using so that you can replicate them and use them in your own ad creative. A huge thanks to the brands and agencies that actually shared all of these winning ad creatives. I've been keeping a winning ads database that people have been posting on Twitter. So it goes without saying that you should give all these people a follow because they're a great resource if you're trying to make better ad creative for meta ads. Because it's one thing to look at ideas for ad creative and it's a whole other thing to actually see what a winning ad looks like. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now, first we're going to look at two ads from the agency Fire Team. I'm also wearing their sweatshirt that they gave me, so shout out to them. They're a great agency that's based out of the US that focus on growth and performance creative. So if you're looking for a 360 agency, I definitely recommend them. They are also the hosts of Adtopsy, and they have a new podcast that's out as well. So let's go over these two ads. First one is this Choose 6 format. Now, the way that I like to analyze creatives and really get down to the meat of why it performed well or didn't boils down to three major things. Number one is the format. How is this ad actually being structured and showing up on people's social media feeds? Next up is messaging. How are we actually speaking to these people? What are the words we're using? What's the primary text? What's the text on the actual ad creative? And then last, and I would say it is probably the least important overall, is the visuals. What types of visual cues are we using so that we are attracting the right people? Now, when we look at the format of this ad, yes, it is an image graphic. I actually think it's more in line what I like to call a grid style ad that I see being really popular and getting good performance out of, particularly in the apparel industry. I think the messaging here is the real genius of this ad, right? And it says choose 6. So really it's doing two things pretty well. Number one, it's explaining the product. So you kind of get an understanding of what the product is without some lengthy introduction, right? And it actually encourages you to select the items that you want. Just says that this boils down to gamification, meaning that it causes you to kind of play a game with yourself to see which items you'd actually choose. In fact, as I'm looking through this, I am selecting my 6 now. Now, when I look at the visuals here, the thing that I think is actually the most important are the products and the brands that they're featuring. I actually worked for a similar brand that did something like this in the same industry, and it was one of those sort of delivery box services. You didn't get to choose the type of stuff that was in your box though. But something that we learned is that the products and more importantly, the brands that we featured played a huge role in determining the performance of the overall ad creative and in the value that people associated with our products. So if we used a brand that we knew was really popular at the time and we showed it inside of the box, of course it had to actually be in the box, then of course if we made sure to show that at the beginning of the video or if we showed that as the biggest object in the box, that tended to increase our performance. What's really cool about this Twitter thread in general too is just show the iterations that they made to actually get to that winning ad creative. Now the one where it's circling some of the different products, I like that they're circling in on certain products, but I think the text at the bottom is just a little too clunky. It's kind of making me work a little bit too hard. I also don't love the products that they circled, so that just seems like a personal preference. And then they had a carousel. I think again, it's kind of putting too much work on people, whereas the choose 6, you just kind of sit back and it feels fun, it feels engaging, it feels like content. This is a little bit much for the swiping. And then the pick 6 under 30, same kind of critique. Like I also think that they're potentially pointing out brands that maybe people aren't as interested in. I've never heard of Lost in Wonder. I have heard of Funboy, but it seems super seasonal. Beach Riot I have heard, but I feel like it's actually a lower tier brand. Amika I know and love. Monteith, I have no idea who that is. Fenty, I do know, I've never used it. And I think there's just honestly like a little bit too much to test here. They would have to test several different brands to see what people were really connecting to, which is why I think the Choose 6 one ultimately, yeah, I mean, that's the one that did best and I can see why. It seems that the Choose 6 ad has spent a bit over $125,000, which is pretty good. Starting to scale it up. We love to see it. Now, the next ad from Fire Team is a UGC ad by after.com, which helps people when there is a death in the planned family or when they are helping to plan their eventual demise, which sounds so dark. D2C death, essentially. Now, this ad is wild. Oh, also, please be sure to check out the description below. I'll have links to all these ads so that you can watch them with me. Now, watching this ad, it reminds me of Ogilvy's perspective that you need a really big idea for an ad to really stick. I've been doing some content about Ogilvy lately. I had a big video, and then I've also been posting some videos on my Instagram. And my friend Hannah actually reminded me of this when I was analyzing the ad, that it's actually the big idea that's super important. And I think this is a really good example of that, especially this hook, right? This brand has nothing to do actually with Costco, but the idea that you can buy caskets at Costco is like, so in a way, it's almost kind of like a bait and switch, because you're like, is it going to be an ad for Costco? No way, right? But then, you're kind of thankful for it, right? Because you don't want it to be an ad for Costco. And then it goes into a little bit more of the explanation of actor.com, which I think is really, really interesting. So good work here. And that big idea, amazing. Next up, we have 2 ads from Obvi. Ash over at Obvi. He posted these over the last few weeks. So this is obviously a supplement brand. They recently launched in Walmart. They're the guys that did 40 million in 40 months, which is an amazing accomplishment. Congrats, Obvi. Ash is a great follow because he also shares a lot of his motion workflows, which is really cool. And that's another thing that I have in my creative strategy toolkit that I'm always using for analyzing my ads. So it's really cool to see how he does it. But these 2 ads that he has, number 1, this image, the fupa killer. Now, this is format-wise not special at all. Of course, it's the messaging point here that is insanely special. And Ash actually explains that there were lots of reviews and ad comments that were asking if Obvi would take away someone's fupa. And they were like, huh, interesting. So this is why it is so important to use your customers' words and phrases and have that show up in the ad creative, because it's going to signal to the right people, hey, this is really, this is going to solve the problem that you have. And I also saw on Twitter that some people were copying this ad, but we're Obvi, so don't do that. But go through your own reviews, see what other commonalities or golden nuggets that you can find from your customers that really stick out. And this is one that I think really stuck out for them. Now, the imagery here, of course, Obvi's branding does help stand out against the sea of the social media feed. Hot pink, very eye-catching. And, this is something that I talk about with brands too, is how they can create their product a little bit more for social media, or a little bit more to stand out against the store aisle. So really, it all goes back to how to market your product to signal that your product is right for the person, regardless if where they're at and along multiple stages. But, of course, with this ad, the messaging and headline here are the most important. He also had this community review ad. Now, I think this is a really cool format. It's image-based, but it definitely feels more organic. And it is a testimonial ad, right? But I think, again, they made it feel like it's something that was screenshotted a little bit from the social media feed. And this messaging is classic golden nugget messaging. Particularly what I think works here the most is the transformation that they're explaining, going from a size 16 to a size 12 or 10. That's really impactful. And I loved how they highlighted this too. They highlighted the most important parts of that ad. So thanks, Ash. These were really good. Next up, we have an ad from Andrew Farish. He is a podcaster, former CTC guy, and his team used this unicorn ad format, and it's not the exact ad he says, but he claims that this ad format has, in his experience, 2 to 3x entire businesses. And I can see why. I really like this format. It's not something that I feel like I've done recently, which I think is cool to see, but it's very classic style of video for paid social. He calls it the long form explainer video. Now, this is a classic combination of high-end production, UGC, and images, and it interweaves a really long story about the product and brand. And again, this reminds me of Ogilvy's Rolls-Royce ad, which is like an explainer ad, but in print form, right? It explains the Rolls-Royce product in detail and gets a lot of facts and golden nuggets about the product that people would find interesting. And that's exactly what's happening in these long-form explainer videos as well. And the way you can do this is, what are the most important facts and figures about your product or brand? Roll that into an ad, and honestly, here, the longer the better. I think some of Andrew's ad examples that he showed were, longer than 1.5 minutes, which feels pretty long, but you can also test out the length a little bit here to see what actually is going to work best for you. Now, when I look at the messaging here too, for the hook that he iterated on, the idea of this being the most thoughtful gift, I think, is really clever and compelling. It's a lot more impactful actually for someone buying the gift than to say, oh, this is the best gift, right? Because it makes the person who is buying this gift the hero. And of course, the rest of this video ad is super interesting. I don't even particularly like baseball that much, but I was really interested in the story behind the brand, particularly how they were using gloves that were 60 to 70 years old to be a part of this product. And I feel like too, every time they were adding a new fact or figure, it was just as interesting as the one before. Next up, we have Zach Stuck's founder ad from Hollow Alpaca Socks. Now, it's no secret that format-wise, founders ads crush. It's definitely one of the top performing ad formats that I've seen across the board. And a trend that I've seen recently is by pulling back the curtain and showing people your warehouse and where you're actually making the product. That's something that I've seen perform for brands like Oats Overnight, Happy Mammoth, and now Hollow Alpaca Socks. And I think the success of this ad really boils down to two things. I actually think it's quite similar to the previous ad that we saw from Andrew Ferris. But I think that what's happening here is, number one, Zach's a super likable guy, and I think in many ways he embodies their target demographic, who they also call out really quickly after the hook. I think the target demo can see themselves being friends with Zach and also having a beer with him. This is really hard to replicate, but when you're choosing creators and you're having a founder get in front of the camera for the first time, that's why the ones that I see that do really well are the ones that can really embody and speak to their target demographic well. And then the messaging after that is really just value prop after value prop after value prop. I think it's really cool. And then the final ad that we have today is Space Goods, who was submitted by Ollie. Now, Ollie owns and operates one of the top growth and creative teams out of the UK, and he's also focusing on growing a lot more of his own brands, a lot like Zach. Now, what I think is really interesting about this format, right, this Google search image format, is I have personally tested this a few times and it flopped. But I think this ad does a few things really well. Also, can you spot the typo? So in theory, the actual search query that they're using is something that is actually, hopefully already has a lot of search volume. So what I would recommend for brands that want to test this is look to see how people are actually searching for a product that is like yours or for your product. And you should really split test that messaging to see where you can get the best hit. And messaging wise, the one that they actually chose and that's doing well, it's a really good and broad problem to solve. And again, that imagery, they have that hot pink branding. So it goes back to that, to the way that Obvi even approached their packaging and their product development to make it really approachable from paid social as well as retail in the aisle. Also, I like that they have the press down there. It's just that added little check of legitimacy and trust approval. And that's it. I'm curious about what you guys think about this style of video. I know that this is not my normal setup again. Things are a little crazy in my personal life right now, and I'm excited to give you guys a more formal update soon. So you might see me like this a little bit more over the next few weeks while I'm adjusting, and I will give you a big juicy update soon. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.